The mall was full of noise, people walking everywhere, children laughing, salespeople calling customers, and music playing from the clothing stores. In the middle of all this busy movement, Marcus, a calm black man in his late 30s, walked slowly while holding a small shopping bag. He was dressed neatly, wearing a simple jacket, clean shoes, and a polite expression. He looked like any regular visitor just enjoying a quiet afternoon. But what he didn't know was that someone nearby was watching him with suspicious eyes, someone whose badge gave him power he enjoyed too much. Officer Brent stood near the information desk with his arms crossed, scanning the crowd like a hunter looking for prey. He wasn't checking for real crime, he was searching for people who looked wrong to him. His eyes landed on Marcus, and something inside him clicked. Not because Marcus did anything, but because Brent liked targeting people who couldn't fight back. Or at least, that's what he thought. Marcus stopped near a clothing store and looked at a jacket on display. He didn't touch it, he only looked. But as he turned away, a small keychain from the display shelf accidentally slipped and fell on the floor. Marcus didn't even notice it. But Officer Brent saw the small item drop, and a slow smirk spread across his face. It was the smile of a man who believed he had just caught someone red-handed, even though nothing happened. The officer walked forward with loud, confident steps, the kind that made people look up. He made sure everyone noticed him before he even reached Marcus. Brent loved attention, he loved the feeling of control. The smirk stayed on his face as if this was entertainment for him. Some people nearby glanced toward them, sensing something was about to happen. A kind of strange tension started forming in the air, the kind that makes strangers stop and watch. Marcus turned around when he heard the heavy steps behind him, and he saw the officer approaching. He felt confused for a moment because he had done nothing. He simply asked, "Is everything okay, officer?" His voice was calm, respectful, and without fear. But the officer didn't answer nicely. Instead, he raised his voice loud enough for people around to hear, making it seem like a serious situation. "You think you can just drop something from the shelf and walk away?" he said with a smug tone, pointing at the fallen keychain on the floor. Marcus blinked, surprised. "Sir, I didn't drop anything," he replied politely. He even stepped away from the shelf to show he wasn't holding anything. But Officer Brent didn't care about the truth. He wanted drama, he wanted to show off. He picked up the keychain and held it up like evidence in a crime show. "So this just fell by itself?" he said, loud and sarcastic. A few people stopped to watch, some pulling their phones out slowly. Inside, Marcus felt the sting of injustice. But outside he stayed calm. He was trained to stay calm, something the officer didn't know yet. He kept his hands visible and spoke with controlled breaths. "Officer, I didn't touch the item," he said again. Maybe it slipped off the edge. But the officer raised his eyebrows mockingly as if Marcus was telling a joke instead of the truth. Brent took a step closer, almost invading personal space. His smirk grew wider as if he enjoyed watching Marcus stay polite while being accused. It made him feel powerful, superior, untouchable. "Don't lie," he said. "I saw you near the shelf and I know what people like you do." Those last words made a few bystanders exchange uncomfortable glances. They understood what he meant, and it wasn't professional. It was prejudice. A mother with her young son whispered, "He didn't take anything, I was watching him." But she didn't speak loud enough. She seemed scared to interfere. Another teenage boy quietly hit the record button on his phone. Sensing something wrong in the officer's behavior, a store employee peeked out from behind the counter, recognizing Marcus from earlier when he only asked for directions to the food court. The officer ignored everyone and focused only on Marcus. "Empty your pockets," he demanded. The tone was harsh and disrespectful. Marcus felt a deep frustration rising inside him, but he still kept his posture straight and calm. He knew reacting emotionally would only make things worse. A part of him felt sad that even in a normal mall, on a normal day, he was being treated like a criminal without reason. More people gathered slowly, forming a small circle. Some whispered, some recorded, some shook their heads. Many could see Marcus wasn't acting guilty at all, while the officer's attitude looked more personal than professional. But Officer Brent kept his smirk proudly, thinking he controlled the situation fully, thinking the man in front of him was powerless and alone. But Marcus wasn't just any man. He wasn't weak, he wasn't alone, and he wasn't afraid. He simply looked at the officer with steady eyes, the kind of eyes that hold years of discipline and experience, eyes that stay strong even under pressure. If the officer had paid attention, he would have noticed that Marcus's stance, breathing, and tone weren't normal. They were trained, they belonged to someone used to high-stress situations, someone with authority of his own. And this was just the beginning. The smirk on the officer's face was still there, but soon, very soon, that same smirk would disappear, replaced by shock, guilt, and fear, because he had no idea who he was trying to frame, and the truth would hit him harder than anything he ever expected. The crowd around Marcus and Officer Brent grew slowly, like a circle tightening without anyone saying a word. People were curious, But they were also uneasy. Something about the officer's tone felt wrong to them. It didn't sound like a real investigation. It sounded personal. But Officer Brent didn't care what people thought. He had already decided the story he wanted to tell, and he was ready to perform it loudly. He leaned closer to Marcus, still holding the fallen keychain between his fingers like it was dangerous evidence. "You dropped this," he repeated, speaking slowly as if Marcus was a child who needed to be corrected. Marcus didn't react. He simply stood still, keeping his hands visible, showing everyone he had nothing to hide. "Officer," he said softly, "I didn't drop anything. I didn't even touch that shelf." His calm voice only irritated the officer more. Brent wanted fear, not control. A man in the crowd spoke quietly. "I didn't see him take anything," but his voice was soft, and the officer pretended not to hear it. Brent preferred voices that supported his ego, not truth. He turned to the people instead, raising the keychain in the air like a trophy. "This man tried to steal," he announced. His voice echoed down the mall hall, catching even more attention. Some people stopped walking, some recorded, and some frowned at the claim. It didn't match the calm, polite man standing quietly with his hands open. Marcus felt a heavy pressure inside his chest, not from fear but from sadness and disappointment. He had lived long enough to recognize the pattern. Judgment first, facts second. His mind replayed the officer's words. "People like you," and he felt a sting he had felt many times before in different places, different faces, but still he stayed composed. "I didn't steal anything," he said again, keeping his words slow and clear. "You are making a mistake." Brent stepped even closer, putting unnecessary force into a situation that didn't require any. He grabbed Marcus's wrist tightly, twisting it slightly, not enough to hurt him badly but enough to show dominance. The crowd gasped as Marcus remained steady. "Don't resist," the officer shouted, even though Marcus was not resisting at all. This made some people whisper angrily, "He's not even moving," one woman said under her breath. Nearby, the store employee who saw everything walked toward them slowly. Her hands were shaking. She wanted to speak, but fear held her tongue for a moment. When she opened her mouth, Brent glared at her sharply, and she stepped back immediately. She didn't want trouble, not with a uniformed officer who was already acting aggressive, so she stayed quiet, though guilt filled her eyes. The teenage boy who was recording zoomed his phone in closer, capturing every detail. The officer's smirk, Marcus's calm posture, the crowd's discomfort, and the small keychain lying on the floor earlier. "This is wrong," he whispered to his friend. "This guy didn't do anything." His friend nodded, looking equally disturbed. They both knew the video might become important later. Officer Brent tugged Marcus's arm again. "Empty your pockets now," he demanded. "Show us what you're hiding." Marcus slowly lifted his hands and turned his pockets inside out, empty except for a wallet and a folded shopping receipt. He even placed the items gently on the floor so everyone could see. "There is nothing," Marcus said. "I am cooperating with you fully." His calmness made the officer even angrier, because it made him look unreasonable. "Don't try to be smart," Brent snapped. "I know how thieves act. You think behaving nicely will fool me." Someone in the back said loudly, "He's not a thief, man, leave him alone." But the officer ignored it, pretending the crowd was invisible. His whole world in that moment was Marcus, and the power he believed he had over him. "Turn around," Brent ordered, preparing to handcuff him. Marcus took a small breath but didn't argue. He turned slowly, giving the officer no trouble, no reason to escalate. But Brent didn't care about reasons. He cared about proving himself right. He reached for his handcuffs with that same arrogant smirk still sitting on his face. A smirk that told the crowd he thought he had just won something. The people around them shifted uncomfortably. Some wanted to step forward, but they were scared of being arrested too. The teenage boy recording whispered, "He's going to arrest him for nothing," and his hand shook slightly as he held the phone higher. But something strange began to happen, something subtle, something only a few sharp eyes noticed. A couple of bystanders whispered to each other, "Why is he so calm? Why isn't he scared? He sounds trained," one man said quietly, like he was observing a soldier rather than a civilian. Marcus's posture, his silence, his steady breathing, none of it matched someone guilty or afraid. It matched discipline, patience, and experience, something the officer completely ignored. As Brent placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder to push him forward, a small group of shoppers stepped closer as if to intervene. One woman shouted, "He didn't do anything, officer, stop." Her voice was loud, shaking but brave. It drew even more attention, and suddenly the crowd doubled in size. The air felt heavy, like a storm was building right in the center of the mall. Marcus kept his eyes forward, refusing to let the humiliation break him. He had handled more dangerous situations than this, but still, being falsely accused in front of strangers cut deep. He planned his next move carefully, with the calm mind of someone who had nothing to fear because he knew the truth, and because he knew exactly who he was. The officer didn't know yet, But the truth was about to break his pride completely. His smirk wouldn't last forever. And the moment Marcus revealed who he truly was, every person watching, including the officer himself, would never forget what happened next. The mall had become strangely quiet around the scene, even though hundreds of people were still shopping nearby. It was the kind of silence that grows not because the place is empty, but because something serious is happening, something that forces people to stop whatever they're doing. Marcus stood calmly with his hands visible, his breathing slow, his eyes steady. Nothing about him showed fear, and that alone confused many people watching, because most innocent people in this situation would panic, argue, or defend themselves loudly, but Marcus behaved like someone who had faced worse than an angry officer with a smirk. Officer Brent didn't notice any of this. He was too focused on finishing the dramatic arrest he had started. He still believed he was in control, still believed Marcus was helpless, still believed the crowd didn't matter. Even though voices were rising around him, he pretended he couldn't hear them. The more people questioned him, the more he tightened his jaw and pushed forward with his version of the story, as if louder pressure made him hold stronger to his bias. Marcus lifted his head slightly and looked directly at the crowd, not with fear or a plea for help, but with a silent message that said, "Stay calm, I know what I'm doing." Even without speaking, his presence commanded respect. Something about him felt disciplined, controlled, almost military. A few people noticed it and whispered to each other, wondering why he stood like a trained officer instead of an accused civilian. One elderly man stepped forward, his voice full of frustration. "Officer, I've been watching him for 5 minutes, he didn't steal anything." Brent turned his head sharply and snapped, "Stay out of this." The man didn't move back. Instead he said, "He's cooperating better than some of your own officers do." That comment hit Brent's pride, and his smirk twitched for the first time. But he quickly forced it back, gripping Marcus's arm harder to keep control. "You're going with me," he said. His voice carried arrogance, not law. Marcus's eyes followed the officer's movements while staying completely relaxed. He didn't pull away, didn't resist, didn't argue. His calmness was starting to make Brent uncomfortable, and for the first time the officer wondered silently, why isn't this man scared? A teenage girl stepped forward next, her phone recording tightly in her hand. "Sir, I got everything on camera," she said nervously. "He didn't touch anything, please just review it for a second." Her voice was soft, but the courage behind it was strong. Brent glared at her. "Put the phone down or I'll confiscate it." He said it loudly, hoping it would scare her. Instead, it made the crowd angrier. Someone from the back shouted, "He's threatening her too." Another said, "What is wrong with this guy?" The situation was slipping out of the officer's hands. Something he wasn't used to. His smirk still sat on his face, but it was becoming thinner, forced, cracking under the pressure of so many eyes watching him closely. Marcus finally spoke again, this time not with defense, not with frustration, but with a calm that surprised everyone. "Officer," he said slowly, "you are misunderstanding the situation." His tone was respectful, steady, and strangely authoritative. It wasn't the tone of a guilty man trying to escape trouble. It was the tone of a man who had earned respect long before this day, a tone that made some bystanders straighten unconsciously, like students hearing a teacher enter the room. Brent laughed lightly, mocking him. "I know exactly what I'm doing," he replied, "and I know exactly who you are, another shoplifter trying to play innocent." Marcus didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't argue. Instead, he said something that made the officer pause for half a second. "Do you really know who I am?" It wasn't a threat, it wasn't a warning, it was a question spoken with quiet confidence, and it made the officer blink, because it didn't sound like a scared man, it sounded like a man used to being respected far beyond this mall. But Brent pushed the thought away and tightened his grip. "Turn around," he ordered again, preparing to put on the handcuffs he held ready in his palm. Marcus exhaled softly, almost sadly. "If you insist," he said, and then he did something that changed the entire atmosphere. He reached slowly toward his back pocket. Every movement controlled, visible, and safe. He didn't rush, didn't hide his hand, didn't make a single suspicious gesture. "Let me show you something," he said. Brent's eyes narrowed, ready to shout, ready to accuse again, ready to twist the moment to his advantage. But Marcus continued moving calmly. His fingers brushed the pocket, and he pulled out a slim, worn-out leather wallet. It was old but well kept. A wallet that had seen years of travel and discipline. He held it between two fingers and lifted it where everyone could see. His posture was careful, his body language peaceful, his expression neutral. The officer scoffed. "What, your ID? That won't save you." But Marcus didn't respond to the insult. He opened the wallet slowly, revealing a laminated card with a golden emblem shining under the mall lights. The crowd leaned forward, curious, confused, tense. And even though Brent couldn't see it clearly yet, something inside the crowd shifted. A feeling, a whisper, an instinct. That what Marcus was about to show was not normal, not simple, not something a shoplifter carried. The truth was coming, and it was coming fast, and in just a few seconds the smirk on Officer Brent's face would not just fade, it would collapse entirely. The moment Marcus opened his wallet, the entire atmosphere of the mall seemed to freeze in place. The crowd leaned in, phones raised, breaths held. Everyone wanted to see what he was about to show. Everyone except Officer Brent, who was still standing with his chest puffed out, convinced this was just another excuse, another trick, another way to act innocent. He smirked again, trying to look confident, but something deep in his gut felt a strange, unfamiliar warning, one he didn't want to accept. Marcus held his wallet calmly, his fingers steady, his eyes soft but focused. He wasn't rushing, wasn't panicking, wasn't defending himself with desperate words. Instead, he simply said, "There is something you should see before you continue." His voice carried a quiet authority that made several bystanders straighten instinctively, almost like their bodies reacted before their minds understood why. The teenage girl recording moved closer, careful but determined. The elderly man stepped beside her, whispering, "Watch carefully." The store employee who had been too scared to talk earlier now felt her guilt grow heavier. She pressed a hand to her chest and moved closer too, hoping she could help if things changed. Officer Brent rolled his eyes dramatically. "Let me guess, some discount card?" he said loudly, laughing sarcastically at his own joke. But nobody else laughed, not a single person. Instead, the crowd's silence grew heavier, thicker, more intense. It made the officer uncomfortable, but he didn't show it yet. Marcus opened the wallet fully and lifted a laminated card into the air, turning it slightly so the light hit the emblem on top. A golden spread-wing eagle engraved into a metal badge, bold letters beneath it, and a deep blue engraving that only one type of person carried. Some people in the crowd recognized it instantly and gasped. Others leaned in even closer, trying to get a better look. The teenage girl whispered, almost trembling, "That looks like a military ID." The elderly man beside her nodded slowly. "Not just any military ID, that's high rank." His voice had changed, calmer, more respectful, almost reverent. But Officer Brent still wasn't convinced, at least not yet. "What is that supposed to be?" he asked, trying to sound unimpressed, trying to keep his smirk alive. Marcus looked directly at him, his expression still calm, still respectful, still controlled, and then without raising his voice, without any anger, he said, "Read it." Something about the way he said it, the tone he used, made the officer's smirk falter again. Hollow cracks formed along his confidence. He reached out, snatching the ID roughly, but his hands weren't as steady as before. The moment his eyes landed on the text, his entire body stiffened. His lips moved, reading silently, and his eyes widened little by little. The crowd watched carefully, hoping for an explanation. The teenage girl zoomed her camera in, capturing the moment perfectly from only a few feet away. Finally, his voice broke through the silence, but it wasn't strong anymore. It was shaking. "See, Colonel? Marcus J. Ward. United States Army," he read out loud, his voice cracked halfway. It wasn't just an ID, it wasn't just a military card, it belonged to a man who had outranked almost everyone in the mall, including the officer himself. A wave of shock spread through the bystanders. Some gasped loudly, some covered their mouths, some whispered, "Oh my God," while others looked at Marcus with newfound respect. The store employee felt her eyes fill with tears of guilt for not speaking earlier. The teenage girl whispered, "He's a colonel, he's a real colonel." Officer Brent felt every bone in his body turn cold. The golden emblem he had mocked moments ago now burned against his fingers like fire. He didn't know whether to drop it or hold it tighter, but either way he couldn't breathe properly anymore. His smirk, his proud, arrogant smirk, evaporated from his face completely, replaced by a shaky expression of fear and embarrassment. Marcus didn't gloat, didn't brag, didn't smirk back. He simply stood straight, watching the officer with the same calm eyes, the kind of eyes a trained military leader would have when dealing with unnecessary aggression. "I tried to tell you," Marcus said quietly. "You should have listened." His voice wasn't angry, it was disappointed, and somehow that hurt Brent more than if he had shouted. A man in the crowd said loudly, "You framed a colonel." Another woman shook her head in disbelief. "You grabbed him for nothing, and he's a high-ranking officer." The teenage boy recording whispered, "This is gonna be everywhere," already imagining the viral explosion that would follow. Brent opened his mouth, trying to defend himself. I didn't know, I was just..." But nothing he said sounded believable anymore. He looked around, panicked, hoping someone would support him, but every set of eyes in the crowd stared back with disappointment, anger, or disgust. No one was on his side now. Marcus took the ID back gently and closed his wallet. "You judged me without reason," he said quietly. "You saw what you wanted to see, not what was true." His words hit harder than any shouting ever could. Brent lowered his head, his pride collapsing, his badge suddenly feeling heavier than ever. He had made a mistake so big it couldn't be hidden. Not with all those phones recording, not with all those witnesses watching. The moment was painful, raw, unforgettable, and little did the officer know. This was only the beginning of his consequences. When Marcus gently folded his wallet and placed it back in his pocket, the entire mall seemed to take a breath it had been holding for too long. People who had been whispering now stared openly, trying to process what they had just witnessed. A moment earlier, many thought they were watching an unfair argument between a cop and a civilian. Now they realized they were standing in the middle of a much bigger story, one that would change everything. Officer Brent felt sweat forming on his forehead even though the mall air was cool. His knees weakened slightly, but he forced himself to stay upright, his pride clinging to the last pieces of authority he had left. He swallowed hard, trying to pretend nothing had changed, but deep inside his stomach twisted. His heart raced faster than he could hide, because he had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. Marcus stood calmly, his posture straight and steady, not a hint of arrogance in his expression. He didn't raise his voice, didn't gloat, and didn't flash his rank the way some men might. Instead, he looked at Brent with a quiet disappointment that cut deeper than anger ever could. "Officer," he said softly, "you made assumptions before you asked questions." His words were simple, but the meaning behind them was sharp and heavy. The store employee stepped closer, gathering every bit of courage she had left. He didn't take anything," she said, her voice trembling. "I saw the keychain fall on its own earlier." She looked at Marcus with guilt, her eyes watery. "I should have spoken sooner." "I'm sorry," Marcus nodded kindly. "Thank you for speaking now," he said, and somehow those gentle words made her tears fall harder. The teenage girl who recorded everything stepped forward too, her voice louder and more confident than expected. "Sir, I have the whole thing on camera," she said. From the moment the keychain fell to right now, the crowd murmured at her bravery, some nodding proudly. Her phone was still recording, still capturing every second, including the officer's panic. Brent's face turned pale. "Put the phone down," he ordered weakly, but the power behind his voice was gone. Nobody listened to him anymore, nobody feared him anymore. In fact, the people who watched earlier from a distance were now stepping closer, filling every gap, forming a human circle around the scene. He felt trapped. Not by Marcus, not by force, but by the truth itself. Marcus looked around at the crowd, then back at the officer. "This didn't have to become what it did," he said calmly. "You could have talked to me with respect, the way I spoke to you." Brent felt his throat tighten. I didn't know who you were," he muttered, voice shaking. Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly. "Did you need to know who I was before treating me like a person?" There was no anger in the question, only truth, and that truth cut deeply. The crowd murmured louder now, several people nodding, some whispering, "Exactly, and he's right." A mother holding her young son covered his ears slightly, whispering, "Do you see why respect matters?" Another man shook his head. "This officer messed up big time." Brent stepped back, his pride collapsing brick by brick. His hands shook slightly as he lowered the handcuffs he once held confidently. "Sir, I may have overreacted," he stuttered, but it was too late for soft excuses. The teenage boy recording replied loudly, "You didn't overreact. You tried to frame him." His voice echoed across the hallway, drawing even more attention. Marcus didn't raise his voice, didn't move aggressively. He simply said, "Your job is to protect people, officer." His tone was strong but calm, not to create problems where none exist. He looked down briefly, gathering his thoughts. "I have served this country for many years," he continued. "I have led soldiers, faced danger, and seen lives destroyed because of misunderstandings." He lifted his eyes again. "And here, today, something as simple as a fallen keychain almost became another example of harm caused by judgment." Brent felt like every word was peeling away the last pieces of his pride. He wanted to disappear, to run, to hide from the phones, the people, the truth, but he was stuck in the center of a storm he created. I'm sorry," he finally whispered, but the apology sounded thin, weak, and far too late. The crowd didn't boo or clap or cheer. They simply watched silently, letting the weight of the moment settle. The truth didn't need noise, it needed clarity, and clarity had arrived. A mall security guard rushed onto the scene finally, breathless and confused. "What's happening?" he asked, looking between the two men. Before Brent could speak, 3 different people said at once, "He framed a colonel. He grabbed the wrong man. It's all recorded." The security guard's eyes widened, his posture straightening instantly as he looked at Marcus with respect. "Sir," he said softly, "do you want to file a complaint?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "No," he replied, surprising everyone. "I don't want revenge." He looked at Brent. "I want understanding." The officer stared at him, confused and ashamed. Marcus continued, "Learn from this, so the next person you meet doesn't go through what I just did." The words echoed in the space like a lesson, a warning, and a chance, all in one. Brent nodded slowly, his eyes lowered, his smirk long gone, replaced by the weight of everything he had just done, and though the situation wasn't over yet, every witness could feel something shifting. Justice wasn't finished and soon the consequences would follow. The mall grew even quieter as Marcus's words settled in the air. His calmness, strong, steady, unshaken, felt louder than any shouting ever could. The people standing around were no longer just curious bystanders. They had become witnesses to a moment they knew was important, a moment that would stay in their memory for a long time. Marcus stood tall, composed, dignified, while Officer Brent looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff with no way back. His badge felt heavier by the second. Mall security, unsure of how to handle such a charged scene, asked gently, "Sir, what would you like us to do next?" Marcus breathed slowly as if he was choosing his words carefully. "I want the truth to be acknowledged," he said. "That's all." His voice didn't rise, didn't shake, didn't carry anger. It carried something far stronger, principle. A young mother stepped closer, her tone full of courage. "He treated you horribly," she said to Marcus. "He can't just walk away from that." Marcus nodded politely. "There will be consequences," he said softly, "but they don't need to come from me." Several people around him nodded in agreement, understanding the message behind his words, that justice doesn't always come from revenge. Sometimes it comes from truth and exposure. Brent wiped his forehead with a shaky hand, trying to piece together some form of authority. "Everyone, calm down," he tried saying, but his voice cracked. The crowd didn't respond. They didn't see him as an authority anymore. He looked smaller than he had when he approached Marcus with that confident smirk. Now, his shoulders slumped, his hands trembled, and his pride leaked out of him like air escaping a balloon. The teenage girl stepped closer again, lifting her phone. "I recorded everything," she said clearly, "and I'm not deleting it." Her voice didn't waver. It was steady, brave, and full of purpose. Brent swallowed hard. "That recording is part of an investigation now," he said weakly, trying to sound official. The girl narrowed her eyes. "And the investigation will show what you did," she replied sharply. A man in the crowd said, "You only acted tough when you thought he was powerless." Another added, "But now you know he outranks you by a mile." The elderly man shook his head slowly. "Son, you picked the wrong man to humiliate." Brent felt the words strike him like sharp stones, and his chest tightened with something he hadn't felt in years. Shame, real shame, the kind that forces a man to look in the mirror and hate what he sees. Marcus watched this quietly, not enjoying it, not gloating, not celebrating the officer's humiliation. He simply observed it with the calm eyes of someone who had seen conflict before, someone who had seen the worst and still chose discipline over chaos. "Officer," Marcus finally said, breaking the heavy silence, "do you understand what went wrong today?" Brent looked at him, eyes glassy, face pale. I made a mistake," he muttered. Marcus tilted his head. "A mistake?" he repeated softly. "Or a judgment?" The words hit harder than any punch. Brent lowered his gaze, unable to look Marcus in the eyes. People around whispered, "He knows he messed up. He can't hide from this. This is serious." Marcus continued with calm firmness. "You saw me through your assumptions, not through the truth." His words were steady, like a gentle storm, quiet but powerful. "And if I were anyone else today, you might have ruined their life." The officer closed his eyes tightly, the truth slicing deeper than any insult ever could. The store employee finally found her courage fully, stepping directly beside Marcus. "He didn't steal," she said loudly so everyone could hear. "He didn't do anything wrong, and I should have spoken earlier." Marcus looked at her and nodded again. "Thank you," he said. She wiped her tears quietly, relieved she finally stood up for what was right. A mall supervisor arrived at the scene, alerted by radio chatter about a large disturbance. She pushed through the crowd, her face freezing when she saw the situation. A distressed police officer, a calm civilian, and dozens of recording phones. "What happened?" she asked seriously, no nonsense in her tone. The teenage girl raised her phone. "Everything," she answered simply. "Everything is recorded." The supervisor turned to Marcus. "Sir, are you okay?" Marcus nodded. "I am," he said. "But what happened here needs to be addressed properly." She nodded back and then turned to Brent. "Officer Brent," she said with authority that instantly made him tense up. "Hand me your incident report file." He stiffened. "Ma'am? I didn't write one." The supervisor's eyes narrowed sharply. "You approached a civilian, accused him, physically restrained him, and you didn't start a report." Brent's throat dried up completely. I thought." She cut him off sharply. "You thought wrong." Then she turned back to Marcus respectfully. "Sir, we will be filing everything properly. We will review all footage from mall cameras, and these witnesses," she gestured at the crowd, "can give statements if they wish." Several people nodded eagerly, happy to support Marcus. Marcus simply said, "That's all I ask for, truth." His calm voice carried farther than any shouting could. The officer, trembling now, whispered again, I'm sorry." The apology felt like a final drop of water falling into a deep well, small, too late, and barely noticeable. But the consequences were no longer in his control. The truth had taken over, the crowd had taken over, and the world outside this mall, once they saw the footage, would take over too. As Brent stood there, almost shrinking under the weight of his actions, he realized something he had never admitted before. Power misused becomes weakness, and lies, once exposed, become chains. And Marcus, standing tall and calm, had just turned the entire situation into a lesson everyone would remember. The crowd remained gathered even as the situation slowly shifted from chaos to clarity. People who had stopped for curiosity now stayed because they felt part of something bigger, something real and meaningful. Marcus stood quietly at the center of it all, his posture still straight, still calm, still dignified. The storm he had just walked through had not broken him. It had revealed him, and now, everyone knew exactly who he was. Not just a man, but a leader, a soldier, a colonel. The mall supervisor spoke with authority as she addressed the situation. "Thank you, everyone, for staying," she said. "Your statements will help ensure this is handled correctly." People nodded, some eagerly offering to stay, others ready to follow the group when called. The teenage girl still held her phone raised, recording everything until she knew the truth was safe. The elderly man who had spoken earlier stood proudly beside her, as if protecting her bravery. Officer Brent looked lost, standing awkwardly with his eyes fixed on the floor. His hands shook slightly, and the weight of his badge suddenly felt like a burden instead of honor. Any hint of a smile had disappeared long ago, replaced by a hollow expression. The expression of a man who finally understood the size of his own mistake. He opened his mouth several times as if to speak, but no words came out. Marcus watched him for a long second, not with hate, not with anger, but with something deeper, disappointment mixed with understanding. He had seen fear, arrogance, and mistakes on battlefields far worse than this mall, but he also knew that lessons learned under pressure stay with a person forever. Finally, he spoke. "Officer," he said calmly, "look at me." Brent hesitated, then slowly lifted his eyes. "This moment," Marcus continued, "doesn't have to define your life, but it will define what you choose to do next." The words were simple, but they hit the officer harder than any punishment. They weren't meant to hurt him. They were meant to reach him, and they did. Brent's eyes welled with tears he tried to hide, but couldn't. He whispered, I'm sorry, sir." Marcus didn't speak right away. He let the apology hang in the air, letting the crowd feel the weight of it. The mall supervisor stepped forward again and placed a hand on Brent's shoulder, not in comfort but in control. "Officer Brent," she said firmly, "you are suspended effective immediately pending investigation." The crowd murmured in approval. A few whispered, "Good. He earned it." Finally, the officer didn't argue. He didn't even lift his head. He simply nodded, accepting the consequence that had finally caught up to him. Marcus then turned away from the officer and addressed the crowd. "Thank you," he said softly, "for speaking up." His voice carried gratitude, not pride. "Your voices mattered today." The teenage girl stepped closer, her voice shaky but proud. "Sir, I only recorded it because someone needed to." Marcus smiled gently at her. "And that makes you brave," he said. "A witness is sometimes the strongest force in a moment like this." Her eyes sparkled with pride she hadn't expected to feel. The elderly man stepped forward too. "Son," he said to Marcus, "you handled this with more strength than most people could." Marcus shook his hand and replied, "Strength is not in shouting," he said. "It's in staying calm when the world tries to shake you." Those who heard him felt the words settle inside their hearts like quiet wisdom. The store employee came next, tears still in her eyes. "I'm so sorry I didn't speak earlier," she said, voice trembling. "I was scared." Marcus placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Courage is not about being fearless," he replied. "It's about doing what's right when it matters." She nodded slowly, letting the words comfort her guilt. Mall security escorted Officer Brent away, not in handcuffs but with firm steps. The crowd parted as he walked, not out of respect, but because the moment had passed and consequences were already in motion. Every step he took felt heavy, like each one carried a lesson he would never forget. The smirk that once defined him had disappeared, replaced by the silent understanding that actions have weight and truth has power. With the officer gone, the mall seemed to take another deep breath. The noise of normal life slowly started to return. Distant conversations, soft music, footsteps, but around Marcus, the space still felt charged, filled with something different now, something meaningfully quiet. A woman approached with her young son, gently pushing him forward. "My boy wants to say something," she said. The child looked up shyly and whispered, "Thank you for being strong." Marcus knelt slightly and smiled warmly. "Strength is something everyone has," he said to the boy. "You just need to use it at the right time." The child nodded, eyes wide with admiration. As people slowly dispersed, talking among themselves about what they witnessed, Marcus finally took a long breath and turned to walk away, not rushed, not shaken, simply moving forward as if closing a chapter with dignity. The mall doors opened automatically as he approached, letting in a soft breeze from outside. The world beyond the mall was calm, bright, peaceful, the perfect contrast to what had just happened inside. Before stepping out, Marcus looked back one last time, seeing the crowd slowly fade and the empty hallway where the confrontation had taken place. He didn't smile or frown, he simply nodded to himself, as if acknowledging the universe, acknowledging the truth, acknowledging that justice had taken its first step. Then he walked out into the open world, head high, shoulders straight, carrying the strength of a man who didn't need a uniform to earn respect. And everyone who witnessed the moment, every stranger, every bystander, every voice that spoke up, walked away knowing they had just seen something rare. A lesson in dignity, a reminder of truth, and the quiet power of a man who stood strong against prejudice. A story they would remember, share, and repeat for years to come. Because some moments don't just change people. They change everyone who sees them.